Hey guys, today's story is going to focus on true demon stories. But before we go into that, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, especially if you want to see more true scary stories and true paranormal stories. I never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. I always thought the stories about people being haunted or possessed were just stories made up for entertainment, or cases of severely mentally ill patients being misunderstood by fanatical priests claiming demonic possession. I never suspected that they were actually real, but when I was 13, my naive brain would be put in its place. It was the summer of 2007. Life was good. I had a pretty normal teenage life. I had a few friends my age who lived in the same neighborhood as me, and we would do a lot of outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, and fishing. We lived just north of the Ozark Mountains in a nice little town in Arkansas. My father had worked very hard to give us all a good life. He came from a poor family and joined the military at 18 to better his future, and it paid off. He got a good job working on airplanes, and we moved to the country. My parents got a steal on a really nice old house in the village. It was a nice little community built into the woods, which had golf courses, private lakes, and trails, and its own shopping center with a Harps and a couple of other restaurants. We were a happy, normal middle-class family. That is, until that thing showed up and ruined our lives. There were a lot of local legends about the natives that used to inhabit the area. Supposedly, our entire community was built on top of sacred land. I used to walk the trails near my house a lot, and you could find cliffs and overhangs with Indian paintings on the walls and remnants of their civilization. I always felt bad about how they were driven from their homes by my ancestors, but I was still grateful for my home and wonderful life. The kids at school would often scare each other by telling tales of shamans summoning skinwalkers and rakes, and that to this day, they still haunt the woods at night, looking for a midnight snack. I always laughed it off. Ghosts and monsters aren't real. They're just made up stories to scare kids. I always thought that the ghost hunter shows were ridiculous. You wouldn't hear or see anything on camera, but the people in the show would jump at a creek in the night and suspenseful music would play while the camera focused on empty darkness. Those shows can be fun for the imagination, but the reality of paranormal entities is much more terrifying. They can tear apart families and bring your whole world crashing down. I would learn this dark reality one summer night. The air was cool. I had my window open and could hear the wind flowing through the leaves. The cicadas reverberating through the midnight woods put me in a sleepy trance. I relaxed and drifted off to sleep. In such a peaceful place, I was completely safe. I always felt one with the woods. It really is beautiful here. Cradled in the sounds of nature, I drifted deep into sleep. Then, a wave of panic. I feel every hair stand up, chills down my spine. I feel the eyes of someone on me. I can feel their sinister intent. Every fiber in me is telling me to run. There is something here that wants to kill me. No, worse. It wants to own me, to see me suffer. It has been watching me for a long time, and I have been chosen. I can't breathe. Help me, help me. I scream, Mom! I hear laughter. Not human, not a physical voice. Multiple voices of all octaves laughing at once. I can't open my eyes. I can't breathe or talk, but I see its eyes. Blue, bloodshot, bulging eyes. Huge pupils. Red is filling my mind. I feel pressure. My entire body is vibrating, and I feel like I'm going to explode. I gasp as I fully awaken, but as I open my eyes, I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Through my open door, I can see something laying on our living room couch. It's clearly visible, but clearly not a person. It's like a shadow, but flowing. The moonlight illuminates its face, a skull with a sinister smile. It has those same eyes from my dream, huge, bulging, wide-open eyes, crystal blue pupils. It's staring at me, smiling. It's awkwardly sprawled out on the couch, and its shadowy body like a translucent but pitch-black cloak, flowing as if underwater. I'm getting chills just typing this, and I want to be clear that this is not a fictional story. This really happened. I was so scared, I was frozen. I felt electricity going up and down my spine, through my brain. My eyes were wide and watering. My mouth hung wide open. It stared into my eyes, into my mind for what felt like hours. It then quickly shifted out of sight. It darted down the couch and into the shadows. Adrenaline hit me and I ran into my parents' room. I burst open the door panting and covered in sweat. My parents were at first annoyed, and it was the typical thing parents do when something like this happens. But as I described every detail about my encounter, and when they saw how terrified I was, I started to see a look of unease and fear in my father's eyes. He was scared. He believed me. My father, being a devout Christian, believed in demons, and he was convinced I had just been tormented and that I was in danger. He was very serious, and I could see that he was disturbed by what had just happened. He woke up my little sister, and the whole family gathered in the living room. I wish my dad had never done what he did next. He got out his Bible and turned the pages to a verse. I don't quite remember the actual verse, but it was something about casting out demons. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave my family alone," he yelled angrily, cursing the demon. "If you want one of us, take me. Leave my family alone." We sat in the living room, talking well into the night, and after a while, we were all tired and went back to bed. But I couldn't sleep, though. I couldn't forget those eyes, its evil smile, the way it moved. It was all so disturbing. Fast forward a few months and things were normal. Me and my sister went back to school, and for the most part, I had forgotten all about the demon. I even convinced myself it was a bad dream, or even sleep paralysis, even though that was the only time sleep paralysis had ever happened to me. I went on with my life until we got the worst news I'd ever heard to this day. My dad was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and it had spread. He was dying. We were devastated. I hugged my father and cried all day that day. I couldn't believe I was going to lose my dad. He was always so strong and seemed very healthy. The weird thing is, and the doctors were also puzzled by this, his cancer was usually only found in teenagers. In fact, it was a cancer that was almost 100% of the time only found in boys in their early teens. This shocked me and made me feel guilty. The whole experience of the demon became prominent in my mind, and I remember my father's words to the demon. I think it had its eye on me and went for my dad instead. I wish it had taken me, though. My family would be much better off today if it had. My father remained positive through his sickness. He went to chemotherapy sessions, started eating healthier, and worked out as much as he could. With his bald head and amputated leg, people would often come up to him and thank him for his service. He always laughed and said thank you because he was a veteran. However, contrary to what people thought, his condition was much worse than if he had stepped on an IED. He lived for 3 more years, even though the doctors said he had less than a year to live. He always stayed happy and positive, more for our sake than his own. But toward the end, he started to slowly deteriorate. It was awful. I couldn't do anything to help him. The man I looked up to, who protected us, who I always saw as invincible, was crumbling before me. He lost all his weight and started sleeping on the couch to not disturb my mom. He was so sick. He suffered so much. I would hear his death rattles and moans and want nothing more than to help him in any way I could. Something that disturbs me so much to this day is that I started to realize something. He more and more began to physically resemble the demon. He was getting so thin he looked like a skeleton, and he also had very blue eyes. Sometimes he would just look at me from the couch and I would get chills. The demon had been mocking me, imitating what he would do to my father while viciously smiling, as if it was funny. This enrages me. How could something be so vile, so purely evil? My poor father soon died and left us a broken family. My mother fell into a deep depression. I looked after my little sister, tried to be the best father figure I could be, even though I was a poor substitute. We fell behind on the bills and the bank foreclosed our house. We lost everything. The next handful of years were a struggle, but now I'm an adult and have gotten some sort of a stable life. I recently figured out why my father was so shaken that night and didn't just blow it off as a bad dream. I visited my sister recently and we started talking about ghosts and the paranormal. I asked if she had ever seen anything like that and she hesitated for a second, but then told me, and what she said to me gave me the chills. She was very young the night I saw the demon and had largely forgotten that night, but she told me she used to see a shadowy man standing at the end of her bed, and he had a skull for a face. Demons are real. At one point a few years back, I ended up working in a small privately owned restaurant. It was set on a small main drag in a tiny historic community. The restaurant definitely stood out amongst the locals and tourists due to its multicultural food variety. The restaurant served everything from American cuisine to Indian, Thai, French, and even Middle Eastern foods. The small restaurant was formerly a popular, privately owned Chinese restaurant and a local favorite, but unfortunately, the older man that owned and operated it passed away inside the restaurant one day. So suffice it to say that the local townsfolk didn't take too kindly to the foreign city woman that bustled in shortly after his death and purchased his restaurant. Not only was my former boss flaky and irresponsible, but she could also come off as quite curt and rude at times. So she had a rough go at first obtaining the proper permits and whatnot in order to renovate the historic building. The thing is that when you do certain renovations in an old building like that, the local laws require you to then update a lot of other things that could be quite costly. So that meant that she decided to just use the staff that she'd hired, which was us, to help her with most of the renovation work. Everything was going pretty smooth, nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until one overcast, drizzly day when we were all gathered in the dining area for a staff meeting. As we all sat there quietly, listening to the boss lady, something a little strange happened. The front entrance door to the restaurant suddenly opened to about halfway and then carefully closed after a second, as if someone had simply stepped in. Of course there was no one there as the door was almost entirely glass and we would have seen a person on the other side. We all looked at one another confused, but we just chopped it up to be the breeze since the back door was open, though there was a set of closed kitchen doors in between. The second odd thing to happen happened to another employee when she was there alone one night. According to her, just after she turned a corner passing a shelf with some tools on it, an empty cordless drill case went flying past her head. It barely missed her and smashed into the wall in front of her. She definitely seemed pretty put off when she told us about it in the kitchen the next day. Following that, random small things would happen here and there. Like, our boss would ask us once in a while why one of us didn't come into her office when she'd see one of us walk by her open door. But we were usually puzzled by that, as none of us had ever even walked past her office during that time. Besides that, we'd get the occasional strange sound, like a faint voice or a door opening or closing. Also, when I'd be in the kitchen putting together some ingredients for a recipe, and I'd have to walk away for a second to go grab another ingredient off the back shelf or something, I'd return less than 15 seconds later. One of the ingredients I'd set out prior to leaving the area would be gone. I'd end up having to measure out and prepare the same ingredient again, annoyed, but I had no idea that it was about to get a lot more terrifying for me. The final thing to happen to me and my other coworkers was the worst experience I ever had that was paranormal, hands down. But in order to properly explain this part to you, I'm going to need to explain a couple of things about restaurant kitchens to you. In a typical restaurant kitchen setup, you have a cook line, and the cook line is literally that. A line as in a skinny walking or standing space typically between the oven, fryers, and cooktop, with the prep surfaces and small fridges on the opposite side, leaving about a 3 to 4 foot walking aisle forming a cook line. Besides that, there's a dishwasher outside of that line, followed by the rest of what you'd expect to find in a restaurant kitchen. You know, like fridges and freezers all on a large scale. You also got your giant hood fans above the cook area and a hot water heater. The reason why I paint all those out is because together, they all constantly make noise. Think like louder ambient background noise constantly. So, this one day, there are 3 of us working in the kitchen. Me, my boss, and another employee on the dishwasher. My boss and I were on the cook line, while the dishwasher was a few feet away from the cook line. We were all 3 working as normal, when, all of a sudden, it got quiet. Think of when you don't realize you've been hearing a constant low sound until it suddenly stops and then you notice the sudden change in the noise environment. Except for, it got absolutely dead silent. Almost like an invisible soundproof blanket got thrown over the 3 of us. As soon as I noticed it, I looked around at the other 2 and they also looked puzzled. "What in the hell?" I questioned out loud. "Why is it so freaking quiet all of a sudden?" asked the dishwasher guy suspiciously. "I don't know," my boss replied, drawing out her words nervously. She turned to face me, as I was standing directly behind her on the narrow cook line. "Nora, go make sure that the fridges and hood fans are still running. Maybe the power's out." So I ventured the 10 or so feet to outside the cook line area, and weirdly enough, I could hear the hood fans and even the dishwasher, hot water heater, and all the fridges and freezers running like normal. I went back to my boss and with a confused look told her everything's working fine. That was the first creepy part of that, but when I stepped back onto the cook line to tell my boss, all was silent again. "Well, Nora, get back to work grilling those peppers," she snapped. So I got back on the cook line beside her. After a couple minutes though, I suddenly started to get tunnel vision and felt really dizzy and nauseous. I told my boss and she told me to go sit out back for a few minutes and get some fresh air, which I promptly did. As I was sitting outside trying to feel better, I could see my boss go into her office, which was kitty corner from the back door. Since the back door was open with just the screen door closed, I was able to hear her while she made a phone call. She sounded urgent and shaky as she asked the person on the other end of the line to please bring in an abalone shell, some sage, and some kind of weird oil. Now, the reason she needed those particular items was because, according to her, she felt something walk through her on the cook line that wasn't good. The shitty part is that I was standing right behind her, inches away on that cook line. I waited for her to finish the phone call and return to the cook line before I went back in. By the time I got back in, everything sounded normal again on the cook line. When I got off my shift about an hour later, believe me when I say that I made the normally 45-minute drive home in just under 30 minutes. All night that night, I tossed and turned, unable to really sleep. But the few times I managed to slip into sleep, I kid you not, I got jolted right back awake because I would see a screaming, demon-like thing right in my face.